Okay. Hi, future Sam, and anyone else that might be watching this video. I have just gotten back from seeing Jordan Peterson in Cambridge at the Cambridge Live. And it was very different to see him in person than it was to see, I don't know how many tens or hundreds of hours of YouTube videos I've watched of his interviews, his lectures, on a myriad of topics. The talk tonight was an exclusive, of course. No video, no photos, anything like that. But I did write stuff down on... Yeah, can't see that, but I'll go through that in a second. Just of highlight, he said that this was the darkest topic or darkest lecture that he has given so far on his tour of about 90 plus cities throughout America and Western Europe. He spoke on Rule 6, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world, which he said is the darkest rule in his book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, which I can understand. It starts off, and he started off his talk with a quotation from his book, which was talking about several mass shootings that have happened in the past few years, Sandy Hook being one of them, and what the killers, the murderers, what they wrote for their justification of the shooting, and essentially it boils down to nihilism. Humanity doesn't deserve to exist. They cursed God for reality itself, effectively, which that's how he started off. And he said that the topic of the lecture, which I'm not sure if he really stuck fully to this topic or not. In his own words, there are belief systems that are worth constructing. That's effectively what he was discussing and giving a lecture on. It was very interesting. He brought up several authors, but the one that speaks the most to me, for obvious reasons, is he brought up Adam and Eve, a story that humanity can't forget. In his own words, he brought this up. Like, it's an archetype. He says about Adam and Eve, it's so interesting we can't forget it because it describes something that cannot be described in a better way. A story about self-consciousness, and he mentions that Eden is the perfect balance between culture, order, or I think masculinity, represented by Adam as well in the story of the Garden of Eden, and then you have nature, femininity, or the feminine, represented by Eve in the story, and you have the perfect union of that in Eden at the beginning, which keeps going because Adam and Eve don't die, at least not physically, in the story of Genesis. He talks. Let's have a look at this. Yeah. The story of Genesis is effectively how humans, this stuff in our heads, the most complex thing that we know of to date, which is pretty ridiculous. This is the stuff inside this skull is the most complicated piece of matter, collection of atoms that we know of that produces intelligence. Right. And Genesis is where we separate ourselves from the animals. We become self-conscious. This matter in our heads, our brains, develop the ability to reflect upon themselves. They know of their own existence, which is pretty staggering when you think about it. There's no other animal that can do it to the level of abstraction that we can. For example, chimps have like hierarchies. They have a leader, and the leader they are the top position, like the person themselves. But we've been able to articulate the hierarchy. We've been able to abstract it from the individuals, so that we now have positions such as leaders, for example, a president or a king or queen, and different people occupy that position and move out of it. The king or queen isn't the individual person ultimately, they're serving the role in the hierarchy, which is something that he mentions, not in this lecture in particular, but in other places, in his lecture series on Genesis, for example. Yes, so what is the consequence of this self-consciousness? It's effectively being able to distinguish our own limitations, having the knowledge of good and evil, which before we didn't fully have. Now, why the knowledge of good and evil? It's a good question. I'm going to have to refer to notes. Okay, don't fully know. But when they realise they're naked, it effectively means they realise that they're limited and they're vulnerable. Speaking evolutionarily, yeah, wasn't that a long word? Just based on our anatomy, like other animals are on all fours. They have their soft underbelly pointing downwards, and most things are going to be coming at them from sides, above, head on, the like. Humans, bipedal. This is our vulnerable bit. This. It's like, no wonder we're self-conscious. We open ourselves up to attack, just based on our anatomy, which is pretty crazy. Yes. So back on track. Yeah, so the ultimate consequence of becoming self-conscious and eating the fruit, the knowledge of good and evil, is that we come to the realization that we're vulnerable. And what does that mean? It means that our future is uncertain. Like a lion, they'll just go hunt, eat everything they can, and then sleep. They don't worry about the meal after the next meal. Humans, we worry about everything in the future. Where we're going to sleep, what we're going to eat, who we're going to spend time with, what possible things could go wrong. We worry about our own worries. That's how self-conscious we are. Worrying about worrying, and then you worry about the worrying about the worry. It's just an endless cycle, which not good. So there's two reactions to that, which is where JP moved from Adam and Eve to Cain and Abel, because after Adam and Eve were kicked out, they had to work. They had to work to be able to, mainly in response to the anxiety of the future. They just that uncertainty is so overwhelming you can't ignore it. Like, you ignore it at your peril, because pain, suffering, you ignore them, what do you end up? Dead. That's not a good outcome. You don't want that. So out of necessity you work. Now, this is where the story of Cain and Abel comes in, where you have the first real human civilization, because the first real humans, effectively, because they were the first brothers born of the same parents that are given in Genesis after the first creation of man and woman. So you get an insight into what humans are like, and like they have to work. The curse of the fall was that they realise the future is could be potentially ridiculously bad, and they want to avoid it. So they work in order to produce things for the future, to sacrifice benefits now to survive effectively. So back to notes. So you have the story of Cain and Abel. Abel sacrifices the best that he has to God, and Cain sacrifices less than that, not his best. And then what's the natural consequence of that? You have Abel, who gets glorious things. The representation of sacrificing to God is to sacrifice the best that you have now for the best for the future. While Cain would be something like sacrificing the least, and then you get the least in the future. Now, it doesn't always work out like that. There's a consequence where you could sacrifice now and get hit by a bus next Tuesday, and then you don't get the reward, but that's part of reality. But in general, if you sacrifice something good and the best, later on you will get something that is of equal, if not of more value than that initial sacrifice, which obviously means you should sacrifice the best thing. Now, what's Cain's response when things don't go his way? Because he did the minimum requirement for, let's say, let's have a look. So he effectively asks God. He confronts God about why are all these bad things happening to me, and why are all these good things happening to Abel? He's confronting God about the nature of reality, saying, why is it like this? Why am I suffering? And you have the response from God, which is effectively, you could have sacrificed and been in Abel's position right now. Abel is the ideal that Cain is after, and he knows that he can obtain that. That's what God says. Like, Cain could sacrifice the best and then get to where Abel is, and then he would get the results that Abel got when he sacrificed the best, which is a good life and a good future. However, that's not what we see. That's one possible, the correct response to this is he should go, articulate what is going on, think through it all, find the motivation to better himself to the point where he's as good as Abel, or his own ideal, which is Abel in this case, and then go and do that. He should set a house in perfect order. He should look at something, see if there's any form of improvement he could possibly do, and then do it. Because why else are you here? What else are you going to do? There's no other motivation. We're here, we might as well use it. Yes, Is that a response that we see? No, not at all. What does he do? Goes and murders his brother, which is the other response that you can have to suffering. For example, you can curse the world. Effectively, him murdering his brother is effectively him killing his ideal, which it's like, and it's not, that's one of the results, but if you look at the abstracted view of that, you have Cain killing the idea of Abel, and you could say that Abel represents the idea of the ideal. So Cain is effectively killing the idea of the ideal, which is worse than just killing the ideal. It's like you can't have any ideals anymore. There's no such thing as an ideal. I'm killing it. Therefore, I'm not going to aim at anything, because anything that you aim for is an ideal. It's any form of target that you have. That is effectively your ideal or your god, in this sense. The thing that you sacrifice in order to achieve is an ideal. Very interesting. Totally agree with that analysis. I don't think you can argue against that, to be honest. So, yes, where was I? That was one of the most striking things that I couldn't recall from previous times that JP's spoken about Cain and Abel. That these are the two responses. You can either set your house in perfect order before you criticise the world, or you can criticise the world, curse God, kill the ideal, and then you're just left with nothing. You're effectively left with nihilism, because there's no reason, there's no ideal. You've disowned it, you've disregarded the ideal, you've killed your Abel. So it's like, it's game over. What do you aim for now? There's nothing to aim for. You've killed the idea of aiming for anything, so there's nothing to aim for. Yes, and so out of going beyond that, and I suppose going beyond the Old Testament and into the New Testament, you get Christ, who, at least Jordan Peterson, the way that he kind of articulates it and draws some interesting aspects out of it. Let's say as an archetype, is probably best summed up by this. From Cain and Abel, you get heaven is worth any price. You should aim for the ideal. That's one of the things you can draw out of it, or hints at it. It probably doesn't articulate it the best. There's probably better examples in other literature and in the Bible itself. But you should aim for the Abel, or if you're in Cain's position, you should aim for the Abel, for the ideal, for the heaven. That's one thing. But aiming for it, as I said earlier, the thing that you sacrifice for is your ideal, but it requires a sacrifice. Now, if you think of it as a collective, you can have an ideal. Cough, cough, communism. I'll get into that in a second with the Soviets. Not a good thing. Or actually, I'll get into it now. You have a collective, and they see communism as an ideal. But that requires sacrifice. And sacrifice means you have to lose something. Or somebody has to lose something. So, if heaven is worth any price, who pays for that? Who pays that price? Who pays? Now, if it's anybody other than the individual, that's bad. You don't want that. That's where JP relates to the New Testament, to Jesus, where Jesus himself takes on the maximal responsibility, saving the entire world. And who pays? This is a huge ideal, man. It's gonna cost everything, absolutely everything. Who pays? Jesus himself. Jesus pays. What's his ideal? Save the world. What's it going to take? Ridiculous cost. Who's going to pay it? And what is the ultimate cost? Jesus takes it. His own life, his sacrifice. Therefore, we should live like Jesus. That's what JP says, in this manner at least, from his perspective. You should take on the maximal responsibility, and then you should sacrifice everything, because that ideal is so high and so meaningful and so worth it. Heaven is worth any price. That you should pay that, and the meaning in pursuing that is almost payment itself for the suffering to get to that ideal. Which, I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing this video is for myself to be able to fully articulate that, which is, it's taken me 20 minutes to get to that point on it by itself. Yeah. So that's actually most of it. Yeah, so this is something that I'm going to move back and forth a little bit. Jordan Peterson tells a story, which I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it's worth repeating in some manner. You have a person who goes to a party. There's a guru or a psychologist, a scientist, somebody who could help this individual through their problems. So this person goes up to this guru or prophet or whatever you want to call them, this self-help person, and they say, I have so many problems, I'm suffering so greatly that I almost want to end it. However, what can I do to help my situation? There must be something. So what can I do? And the guru says, why must there be something? Or questions that person, that individual. I'm doing a really bad job of the story. But this is in essence what it is. I'll draw out the main kind of points that JP brings up. Yes, and then the individual or the person responds. There's two possibilities. One, the suffering that I'm undergoing is due to the nature of reality itself. It's not my own actions. I can do nothing about it. I can't solve it in the least. Option two, I'm doing something wrong. I can do something to fix whatever the suffering that I'm undergoing. What can I do? Now those are this is why it's flicking back and forth. This is like reactions to suffering, which is similar to the Cain and Abel reactions, but slightly different. That was in response to self-consciousness and work. This is in response to suffering while you're undergoing it. Yes, that was something that struck me fairly strong. This is the same order that he's done it in. I've just taken the notes, so if I'm flowing around a little bit, this is similar to the way that he did it in order. It's less of a lecture and more of just him trying to articulate his own views, things he's studied over like the past 30 to 40 years. So these two reactions, it's like once you realise these are the two possibilities, it's a no-brainer. You have to go with option option 2. There's no, like, out of necessity, you have to try and at least do something, and you have to believe that you can improve or help yourself or another individual and reduce the suffering in the world. You have to. Like, number 1, it just doesn't lead anywhere productive. And that is where he then said, therefore, set your house in perfect order. The alternative ain't good. You're doing what Cain does, which is challenge God and kill your Abel. Not a good thing. Not a good place to be. Don't do it. Option 2 is far better. Aim for Abel and then become Abel. It's much better. And this is then when he said rule 6 is by far the darkest because of where it starts, and its ultimate, like, undertones being suffering, self-consciousness, work. It's not easy, man. It's not easy. And then he then said this is the hardest lecture and the one that he least enjoys giving and is most worried about and does the most preparation for. Which is like, that's pretty crazy. He said he saved it for Cambridge because he thought that we were intellectual enough, to be able to deal with it, which is, that's insane. Cambridge, the origin of so many great philosophers, physicists. Shout out to all of them, physicists. Isaac Newton, GG, and other thinkers, and so we did a Q&A after a slight break. One of there was a few questions he responded to. The best one that I wrote down the response to was, what's the best advice that he's ever been given? And he goes into his upbringing and advice that his father gave him, which is avoid arrogance, don't brag, be reflective on what you could improve, and that you shouldn't or you can't be revenge seeking or nihilistic against reality until you stop making mistakes. And hey, you never stop making mistakes, so you can never be nihilistic. There's always something to improve, effectively. So that was kind of an overview summary, a 30-minute summary of the entire thing. Man. He was with David Rubin, by the way. He was the host. Pretty cool guy. Yeah. So Jordan Peterson, man. This is the ticket. Gonna keep this. Keep that there, man. So Jordan Peterson, thank you very much.